For many decades, Lena Horne was one of the best known and loved entertainers in the world, known for her talent and beauty, from her Cotton Club debut in the 1930s and her emergence as Hollywood's most glamorous black star, to her Tony Award-winning one-woman Broadway show, The Lady in Her Music. A new biography, Stormy Weather, The Life of Lena Horne, looks at the career and the often troubled life behind it. James Gavin, the author, joins me now. Welcome to you.
Delighted to be here, Jeff.
It's clearly a larger-than-life life, but why did you want to tell her story?
I got the opportunity to interview Lena Horne, who had been a fascination of mine ever since I was a child. In 1994, she was on the brink of her last flowering, her last renaissance, with a new album. Concerts at Carnegie Hall were scheduled, and I was writing a lot of features at that time for the New York Times, and I lurched at the opportunity to have a sit down with Lena Horne, and for 2 hours plus I sat in a hotel room face to face with this woman and got to ask her everything I ever wanted to. I was immensely moved by that experience. It was very wistful, very melancholy, and I got a sense that this hugely inspiring figure had gotten very little pleasure or satisfaction out of any of it, and that the journey had been so hard for her that she was exhausted.
That's how you start the book, with that story. It's very interesting, and then go back and tell that story. Take us to her beginnings. How did she become Lena Horne?
In a sense, as a child, she was flung from the heights to the depths of black society. She was born in Brooklyn into what we now know as the black bourgeoisie, an upwardly mobile, educated, cultivated minority of black people who were intent upon finding their way in white society and gaining some respect for themselves, basically. But as a small child, Lena was plucked out of this setting by her mother, who wanted to be an actress and who dragged Lena through the brutal Deep South of the 1920s. So as a child, Lena got to experience both ends of the pendulum curve, and it set in motion, I think, a lifelong identity crisis for this poor girl that she ran with, in a sense, because she used all of this turbulence in a fascinating way. When we think back on the Lena Horne of the 50s and the 60s on those TV variety shows, fiery, ferocious, fire and ice, mysterious, with all this conflict passing over her face, a formidable figure.
So she made it, all right? I mean, she was a huge success, but behind the scenes, did she feel like she had made it, or what was going on for her?
Well, she grew up with a sense of rejection and alienation that haunted her forever. Her father, whom she adored, had deserted the family when Lena was a small child. And as for her relationship with her mother, she just felt like excess baggage as she was being dragged around the South, dropped off in foster homes, and I think she felt like an impediment to her mother's ambitions. And when her mother didn't make it, she became a kind of Mama Rose figure in Lena's life and channeled that ambition into Lena, and then began to resent her daughter's success as it unfolded.
You're, right from the beginning, you're talking about a race is a factor, obviously, in her life, from the North and the South and throughout the career. And it plays out in unexpected ways as you tell the story, not only in her relations to the white world, but to the black world, right?
Fascinating conflicts were set in motion when she was very young, because in many ways she had been raised to hate white people. Her family, her ancestors, of course, had been victimized in unspeakable ways by white people. And yet, in order to assimilate themselves into society and gain a foothold, they had to adopt a lot of white ways. Lena Horne was beautiful in a Caucasian manner. Back in those days, in the 30s, 40s, she was signed to MGM in 1942. Lena, there was no such thing as black is beautiful. That phrase did not enter the lexicon until deep into the 60s. So the more beautiful you were in a Caucasian fashion, the farther you got. And that's what got Lena into the Cotton Club chorus line. That's what got her chosen by the NAACP to be the figure who would revolutionize the as of that time, shameful black image in Hollywood and show white America a new kind of black person.
What do you mean chosen by the NAACP?
Walter White of the NAACP was looking for a way to revolutionize the black image in movies, because up until that time, black people were presented in the most menial, stereotypical fashion on screen you can imagine, and it really was shameful. Lena Horne was cultivated. She was beautiful. She had a wonderful grace. She had beautiful diction. This was a kind of black person that racist white America didn't expect. And Walter White felt that she could be a woman on screen who could show a whole other way to America.
And yet, in going back to where you started, when you met her, she said to you, "I was never able to enjoy this damned thing," she said, meaning her career. So all of those things you're talking about clearly got to her.
Pressure. When she was less than 2 years old, she was enrolled in the NAACP by her grandmother. She was told, "Don't let anyone ever see you cry." She had to keep up a face. And at the age of 24, when MGM signed her, she had a heavy mantle to adopt that June Allison and Katherine Grayson, the other white girls at MGM, they were all white girls, didn't have to worry about. Lena had a tremendous sense of social responsibility that went side by side with her up there trying to just sing and perform her best.
And did her career, you tell the story, but her career went through various evolutions, and did she have to fight her way through all of those, or were those battles beneath the surface as well?
Being a black person in America in the teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and onward was a battle day to day that I think we as white people, no matter how much we research it and intellectually understand it, can't begin to imagine what it must be like to leave your house every day and feel all kinds of cold drafts out there in the cold world and try and somehow make your way in that world. And Lena Horne, despite the fact that she was this exalted MGM figure, was constantly somehow being reminded that at the end of the day, she was still a black person and considered by a lot of people to be inferior.
And you see her life, when you put it all together, as standing for a much larger picture, a much larger story.
I do, because Lena was born into the days of the Harlem Renaissance. She had Harlem Renaissance figures in her family, and every phase of Lena's journey through life somehow mirrors the development of the civil rights movement and all kinds of cultural changes in this country. And I think that this is the story of everything that led up to this last presidential election. Her story is the story of the people who sacrificed and struggled in order to make this kind of major change. I would love to know, many people would, how she feels about it, but she hasn't spoken publicly or been seen since 2000.
Yeah, that's where I wanted to end with this. We don't know. You have not talked to her since then, and
no, I had the one opportunity to interview her, and that's all. She hasn't spoken at all publicly.
And do we know
now
what
in
she's
9
doing
years.
now?
She's very fragile, and she is home and doesn't leave the house. She's 92. She's on her fourth, to my knowledge, fourth pacemaker, and yet something in her will not let go. When you have that kind of survival mechanism in running, you can't just switch it off most of the time.
All right, the book is Stormy Weather, The Life of Lena Horne. James Gavin, thank you very much.
It was a joy. Thank you, Jeff.